What does the second coming of Jesus have to do with the Galilean wedding? I invite you to watch and see.
Thank you for coming. Now I have a question. How many here know what an actual Galilean wedding is? Well, we don't want to talk to you, or you. We're going to go from scratch, okay? So I'd like to tell you, my earliest memory of my father is I would watch him walk to and fro every night, holding my little baby sister Tabitha. And on his face, he kind of looked like he was sad, maybe a little bit upset, but he was thinking. He was always thinking. And now I know what it was about. You see, in our culture, our marriages are prearranged, even sometimes from birth, because we were told that love is blind. A lifetime arrangement, don't you agree it should be made with eyes open? How many people have heard the saying, I didn't see that, because they were blind. But my father said, I see everything. And it's his job to go through the village and find out who is going to be the perfect family with the perfect little son that would someday be married to little Tabitha. So often you would see him walking through the village, and he would look at maybe a prospective person, and he'd look really good. And then very discreetly he'd go, and then he'd look again. He'd look really good. But something was wrong. He can't put his finger on it. And he'd look again and he'd say, well, unfortunately, that's how it went. And it was weeks on end when he would take little Tabitha into town, and he couldn't find anybody. Well, wait a minute. So he just kept trying, week after week. He just kept trying, but nobody was coming. Nobody was coming to his mind. And he had reasons, okay? To some, he thought, well, he's not tall enough. He wanted Tabitha to be with a tall man. Others, he thought, do I really want to spend the rest of my holidays with this family? No. So that was a no. Others, he thought, maybe you couldn't afford Tabitha. So he had to say no. Oh dear. Sorry about that. Oh, I knew this was going to happen. Oh my goodness. Hey, just a second. Tabitha, you have to be quiet. This isn't your turn right now. It's my turn. Oh, here you go. Here, can you take it, please? Oh, thank you. Oh boy, all right. Okay, sorry about that. So I guess the town was pretty rowdy right now. So anyway, unfortunately, time moves on, right? For everybody. And Tabitha now was approaching her 4th birthday. Now she was turning into a beautiful little girl. She had long, flowing brown hair. She had the kind of smile that when she smiled, the corners of her mouth turned up in such a way that you just wanted to see it over and over again. And may I say, she had my father wrapped around her little finger. There was nothing she could do that was wrong. So that's how it was. So, when you have a problem, when nothing's going your way, what do? You keep on living, right? So we kept on living with no prospect for Tabitha. Then all of a sudden, something happened in early spring. Why do things always happen in early spring? Have you ever wondered? It's like early spring, something happens, right? Well, all of a sudden, a new family moved into our village, and they had a 4-year-old son, the same age as Tabitha. And the exciting thing about that is he had not been spoken for, at least as far as we knew. So my father thought, I gotta jump on this. I can't wait any longer. We have nobody else to look forward to. So I'm gonna have to, he's not gonna talk to my mother about it because he doesn't have time. Sometimes you just have to jump on things, right? So he talked to my little brother and he said, get over there and invite these new people over for a feast. So my brother took off, and when we have a feast, it's not like having someone over for one dinner. They stay for 2 days. For 2 days, we eat, drink, and we get to know each other. So it's a pretty big deal. So off my brother went. Meanwhile, my mother was going to the well with Tabitha. She was trying to train Tabitha what it's like for what mothers do. We go, we get water. So unfortunately, things were not very good for Mother right now because my father had turned the whole town against us. We gave the impression, not on purpose, that we were perhaps maybe a little bit better than anybody in the town because my father denied everybody in the town to be a part of our family. And so what does rejection do? Rejection breeds rejection. So when my mother was at the well, people weren't talking to her. Women were ignoring my mother, and she felt it. She felt it. So here's my mother at the well with Tabitha, and they're waiting their turn. And Tabitha, unfortunately, does not know how to wait. So Tabitha started to get fussy. And pretty soon, she pulls on my mother's dress to try to push her more to the front. And my mother said, Tabitha, stop it. Well, she doesn't like to hear the word stop, and she certainly doesn't like to hear the word no. So she stopped for a minute, but she was frustrated. So Tabitha started to kick the dirt with her sandal. So she went poof, poof, poof. And the next thing you know, my mother grabs her on the shoulder and says, Tabitha, stop. Well, all of a sudden, Tabitha got mad. And Tabitha stopped, but she decided she was going to kick that dirt one more time. So she turned around, she lifted her leg, and she kicked as hard as she could. Ah, my mother in the leg. She hit my mother right in the ankle. Oh my gosh. My mother let go of Tabitha, was grabbing her ankle, and all of a sudden Tabitha races to the front of the line. So my mother, what's my mother going to do? My mother races after her, picks her up. She's kicking, screaming, yelling. My mother's trying to hold her. She's kicking her. My mother forgot her water jug. All she could do, get out. She had to get home. So my mother's racing home with Tabitha as fast as she can. Now, meanwhile, how many of you have been in the middle of an embarrassing situation? What happens? It's dead silence, right? Everyone doesn't know what to say or do. We're just quiet. Then it takes that one woman turns to her friend and she said, boy, you dodged an arrow with that one. Everybody laughed. Thought that was cute. And then somebody else said, the whole village dodged an arrow with that one. Everyone laughed their our heads off. And sure enough, as my mother's carried poor Tabitha off, my mother could hear that laughter, even above Tabitha's screams. So my mother made it home, Tabitha still screaming, kicking, being horrible, and my father, he hears Tabitha crying. Oh, my father races over, grabs poor little Tabitha like she's the victim. Oh, honey, takes her, and he goes to the side of the house and comforts poor Tabitha. When in our reality, let's face it, who needed to be comforted? It was my mother that needed to be comforted. And my mother took that. She was very upset about that. She was so... Have you ever been at your wit's end? My mother had reached her wit's end. So my mother goes into the house and she starts to work on her afternoon bread. And she beats the bread because she doesn't know what else to do. She's frustrated because everything is going wrong. Nothing is going as planned. Then all of a sudden, my little brother runs in and he goes, Mama, Mama, we're going to have a feast. My mother says, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? We're going to have a feast. Well, no, we're not. That's nonsense. No, Mama, we are going to have a feast. Daddy sent me. Daddy sent me to the new people. Daddy sent you to who? The new people. Well, oh, wait a minute. Are you talking? No. Are you talking about the goat herders? Yes, Mama, yes. No. I won't have it. Daddy invited goat herders to our house. This is disgusting. I won't even let sheep herders in our house. They're one step lower than the sheep herders. Are we that desperate? No, I won't have it. I am sick of it. I'm going to spend the rest of my life in humiliation. I will not have goat herders in my house. We don't invite people like that. We invite people that we know, people that we trust, people that we love for a feast. We don't invite vagabonds. No, I'm not going to have it. I won't have it. Mother stormed off into the pantry. The next thing I heard, who ate all the goat cheese? Uh-oh, I did, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm not lying. I'm just not going to say anything right now. Well, as you can believe it, the rest of the day, nobody spoke to anybody. We were all very quiet, and we were all upset in our own ways. And we went to bed that way, actually. And sure enough, the next morning, no sooner than my mother laid out our meager little food, here come the goat herders up our path. Now, the first one I saw was a boy. He looked about my age. And then I saw a girl. I couldn't tell how old she was. And then I saw the mother carrying a set of baby girls, a set of baby twin girls. And then there was the father at the very end, and there was Jacob, little Jacob, kind of hiding behind his father's legs. Well, when my father saw all these family members, he thought, this is prosperity. This is fertility. This is a wonderful family. They can have a lot of kids. My father was very excited, so his shaloms came from his heart. Shalom, shalom, come in, come in. Now my mother still wasn't speaking. So there we are, just trying to, gracefully get to know this family. And now little Jacob is still hiding behind his father's legs. Well, finally, he feels safe enough to come out from behind his father's legs. And Tabitha saw him for the first time. Now, we all were looking because this is very important. We wanted to see, is something really going to happen here? Well, Tabitha looked at Jacob and she gave him one of those favorite smiles. And I heard my father go, oh. So it turned out things were starting to fall into place. Even my mother warmed up because Jacob's mother brought enough food to feed our whole family, and that wasn't customary. And even because of the goat thing, she brought plenty of goat cheese. So everything was going really well, and it was getting late in the day, and it was time to discuss the ketubah. Now the ketubah is the marriage contract, and it's time to discuss how much Jacob's father is willing to pay for Tabitha, which includes the dowry. This is a very important part of our betrothals. So it was late in the day, and everybody was tired, and my father said, you know, why don't we discuss this in the morning when we're fresh? And so everybody agreed, so we all went to bed, and the next morning, when the ketubah is discussed, it's customary for the family members to leave the house. And the only ones in the house are the two fathers. And now they are going to, I'm sure you've heard the word quibble. Well, this is quibble on steroids, okay? They are going to discuss what each one is willing to accept and what each father is willing to pay. Now, a lot of times, what they agree on is by an arm wrestling. They will arm wrestle to see who will pay the higher price. Sometimes a tooth is missing. Sometimes a shoulder is dislocated. But eventually they come to the same price. But unfortunately, interestingly enough, my father that night, when he went to sleep, he had a sore throat during the day, but he didn't want to say anything because he didn't want to ruin the flow. Well, that night, he woke up in the middle of the night with a fever. He was burning up, and he woke my mother up, and he said, I'm burning up. My mother got a cold washcloth and put it on his head, and he went back to sleep. And in a dream, he felt like God had given him a revealing. God had spoke to him and said, do not quibble over the price of Tabitha, because I want you to know you are not in charge of this wedding. Jacob's father is the one with all the power, and you must accept what he wants to give you as a price for Tabitha. So he woke up in the morning, and he'd never had a revealing before, and he turned to my mother, he said, I had a revealing. I heard from God. And my mother said, oh no, you had a fever. Then my mother went back to work. So what happens is that when Jacob's father offered 50 shekels of silver, my father readily accepted. No fight, he accepted, which means that these were the contracts. So by accepting the lesser price and not fighting, my father got the smaller contract. Jacob's father was the winner. He got the bigger contract. Now this will make sense later when we're at the betrothal, because both fathers will hand up their contracts, and you will see who won. And Jacob's father, he was so shocked that there wasn't going to be a fight. And so he, out of guilt, he threw in 5 goats, 3 male and 2 female. And so that kind of eased his conscience. And I personally, I was thrilled to get the goats. I always wanted goats. So we all won out, basically, in that sense. So what happened then is the fathers took their contracts and they each put them in a safe place, and it was never brought up again. So the contracts were hidden until that day of betrothal. And what's interesting for us is, I don't know if you even understand how we are so much like you. Our lives were so much like your lives. We had days and weeks of excitement, joy, happiness, just thrilled to be alive. And then we had the horrible moments of pain and sorrow and loss. We had 1 minute somebody was being born, and we had the joy of seeing a new birth. And the next minute, we had a dear loved one die. And we had to figure out, how are we going to live without this person the rest of our life? We suffered just like you. We were just like all of you. And so our lives were controlled by time, simply as yours are now. And as the seasons went on, our family with Jacob's family, we grew very close. Because when you share the seasons of life, you step in step with each other. Now, Tabitha, believe it or not, it's hard to even say this, she was approaching her 14th birthday. And she was feisty, you can believe it. She fought with everybody. And she basically really fought with my brothers. Now, my mother blamed it on my brothers because they pushed her, and of course she's going to push back. Now, Jacob, on the other hand, he was quiet. He was reserved. He was kind. I would almost say he was like gentle. So anyway, being a sister and all, I would ask Tabitha, I'd say, well, Tabitha, how do you feel about Jacob? And she'd go, what? What are you asking me that for? I go, well, I don't know, I'm just curious, wondering how you felt. And then she wouldn't say anything else. And so then maybe later I'd bring it up again. I'd go, Tabitha, have you seen how tall Jacob's getting? And she'd, no, I haven't seen it. Okay, well, that was the end of that. So for me personally, I had been married. I was married, and I was about ready to have my second child. Mother being the midwife, I was home getting prepared to have my child. And as I was visiting, I had a feeling something was going on, but nobody really said anything to me, but I could tell Mother and Father were like whispering a lot. But they didn't say anything to me, so I just figured, well, I don't live here anymore, so it has nothing to do with me. Well, the next morning, it all made sense. All of a sudden, Mother comes into our room and she slaps her hand. She goes, get up, get up. Oh, what? We're going to the temple. We're going to take Tabitha for her mikvah. We have to go now because the temple gets very crowded. Oh no, this is it. This is what it was. Oh my goodness, it's Tabitha. It's her betrothal. Oh no, she doesn't even know. Does she even understand? Why am I here? Why did I have to be here now? Oh my gosh. I looked at Tabitha and she had this blank look on her face. The next thing I know, we're both putting our robes on and Mother is hurrying us out the door and we're on our way to the mikvah. Now, I'd like to explain what a mikvah is. A mikvah is a Hebrew word for gathering of water. What a mikvah is, it's a ceremonial bath. When a covenant is made before God, there must be a cleansing. And so every temple had a mikvah, and you could not go into the temple without being cleansed. And so we were racing to the mikvah, and Mother starts to talk to Tabitha, and she says, now you know, Tabitha, love just doesn't come right away. You can wait a little bit. You accept this betrothal and love's going to follow. Trust me, I'm going to tell you, love's going to follow. I don't know if Tabitha even heard her at all. So we get to the mikvah, and we have to hold sheets up because I should say not me, but Tabitha has to do it completely naked. So she takes all her clothes off, and it's a pool of water called living water. It must be fresh water, and there's 7 steps going down that represent the 7 days of creation. So Tabitha steps into the water, and she must be completely submerged. Her hair and everything must be under the water. And what we refer that to is, how do you be without sin? The only way is to go back into your mother's womb. And so that's what Tabitha is doing. She's not to touch any of the sides, but she goes back to her mother's womb, where she is without sin. How do you know from whence you come if you don't know from where you came? And so Tabitha is under the water, and normally she comes up, and that's the end of the mikvah. The next thing I know, she dunks down again. Oh, then what? Not normal, you know? And then she pops back up. We think we're getting her out of the water. She goes back under the water again. And I said, Mother. And she goes, be quiet. She needs this. So I didn't say anything. And so Tabitha comes back up without saying a word, which is rare for Tabitha. We put her robe back on her, and then we start to march to the huppah. So we're taking her to the huppah, which is at the end of the city gate. Now the huppah has a beautiful story. The huppah came from the days of Moses. Now Moses, until this time with Moses, God only made covenants with individual people. He never made covenants with all the people. This was the time where God said, I want you all. I will have a covenant with you all. But you must keep my 10 covenants. We call them commandments. They were covenants with God. And so what he told Moses, he said, go up to Mount Sinai and wait for me to give you the covenant. So Moses goes up to Mount Sinai, and he waits to see God face to face. As he waits, God, all of a sudden, he's understanding, if Moses sees God, he'll die. And so what God has to do, he has to put a fog, like a cloud, over Moses. And so he will speak through the cloud. You can feel his presence. You can hear his voice, but you won't be able to see him. And so this is what represents that time of Moses, where you are under the huppah, you are under the cloud, you can feel God's presence, you can hear his voice, and so when you make a covenant with God, he is present. So it's very special to have a huppah. So here we are. And so they're on their way, and here is Jacob. He's already under the huppah, waiting for Tabitha, and his hair is wet because he too just finished his mikvah. So he's sitting here waiting, and he's looking out to see if he can see her. But you guys are all in the way. There's so many people, he can't, Tabitha's pretty short. He can't see her, so he's looking and looking to see if he could see her, and she's not there. So all of a sudden, you guys part the way, and Tabitha starts to walk down the center of the aisle. Now I'm behind Tabitha. I'm still in shock. I'm shocked from the mikvah. She went down 3 times. I'm still trying to figure that out. And so there she is, walking up to Jacob, and I'm only seeing the back of her head. I don't know, is she smiling? I don't know. I'm even shocked she's walking toward him. And so here she comes. She walks straight up. She walks right under the huppah. And here's Jacob, right here. And Tabitha walks, and she is standing right here. But I tell you what, she's not looking at him. She's just looking down. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad, but she's just looking down. So what Jacob does is he takes, this wine is called pure joy. This cup is pure joy. And I think you remember in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus asked if this cup could pass from me, and God said, no, you have to drink this cup. And I think you remember in Scripture, it says he endured the cross for the cup of joy that was set before him. This is his cup of joy. And so what he does is he picks up the vase and he pours the pure wine into the cup of joy. And he turns and he gently reaches to Tabitha. Now at this point, like I said, Tabitha's still looking down. He hands her the cup. She's not looking up. She takes the cup and she's just holding the cup. Now, in our custom, because our marriages are prearranged, the only time we can deny a marriage that's prearranged is at this moment. If Tabitha takes the cup and does not take a sip, but takes the cup and hands it back to Jacob, the wedding's off. Now, it's going to be a big fight, trust me, but the wedding is definitely off. That is her choice. But what does Tabitha do? And this brought a lot of excitement to the crowd because no one knew what was going to happen. So we were just like, is she going to drink the cup? So sure enough, she takes the cup and she takes a sip and she hands the cup back to Jacob. Now, at this point, I've got to figure out how to do this, but you have to know what happened when she took a sip of the cup. Everybody went crazy. Because everyone was so happy. She took a sip of the cup, which was fabulous. And so Jacob took the cup, he took his sip, and he looked at Tabitha, and he said, I now accept you as my bride under the laws of Moses and Israel. You now belong to me. And he put the cup down. I take you, Tabitha. And Tabitha looked up, and for the first time, she tasted and she saw love that she never knew existed, was poured upon her. Now, in our custom, what happens next is Jacob leaves. He leaves and he goes to his father's house. So they're separated for almost a year. And Tabitha leaves and goes to her mother's house. And what they're doing at that time is they're preparing for the wedding. Now, interesting enough, what Jacob said to Tabitha, when he took a sip of the cup of joy, he said, I will not drink this cup again till I drink it anew with you, Tabitha, in my father's house. And so there, Jacob, before he left, he said, before I go, I want to give you a gift, Tabitha. I want to give you something that you will know how much I love you, that this will always be a reminder when we're apart. So he handed Tabitha this gift. Tabitha put it to her chest and held on to it, and then she watched Jacob go to his father's house. Now, when Jacob went to his father's house, he didn't just go there to lounge around. He had an idea. He wanted to build a home for her. That was his job right now. In heaven, we know what the bridegroom's doing, but Jacob, that was his job. And in that day, there was no such thing as real estate. Everybody lived on top of each other. So the only way Jacob could build a home, especially for her, was to build above his father's house. Where his father's roof was, is where their house would begin. So there was Jacob, working tirelessly on a place for her to live, which is so exciting for me. I don't know about you guys, but I just love that. So Tabitha, on the other hand, she went home and she started to get ready herself. Now, interesting enough, things were different in our village. We had stuff going on, just like you guys had stuff going on. We always had big things happening. And the biggest thing that happened just now was King Herod died. And I hate to say it, but we were thankful. We were thankful. He was horrible. He was disgusting. He scared us. He killed us. Can you imagine being ruled under such evil? How could God even pour his blessing on us, being under a government that is ruled under such evil? Well, all of a sudden, our people had hope. Oh, maybe this is the time. Maybe this is when the prophets will say, maybe when all the prophecies will come true. Maybe the Redeemer will come. Maybe the government will rest on his shoulders. So we were all excited thinking, maybe this was something that was changing our life forever. But it wasn't so, because all of a sudden, it was Herod Antipas, his son, who was worse, or almost as worse as he is, and he took over. And so now, were we going to have another 32-year reign of horror? Everybody was despondent, and everybody was full of despair. And then all of a sudden, the oddest thing, his son, we didn't know what happened to him. All of a sudden, he comes back to the village. We hadn't seen him in years. Some of us thought he was even dead. And guess what? He didn't even have clothes. He was wearing animal skins. Scary. He hadn't combed his hair. We just thought, wow, what happened to him? And then the next thing we knew, he was in the Jordan telling people that, guess what? Judgment's coming, and you all need to repent from your sins. You need to come into the Jordan and let me immerse you in the water. We had never heard that before. We always did mikvahs. Now all of a sudden, he's here baptizing people in the Jordan. Nobody knew what was going on, but people were going. People were scared, and everybody was talking about this. Nobody could talk about anything else except for Tabitha. Tabitha was still, in her mind, she was under the hookah with Jacob. All she could think about was Jacob. All she could think about is when he handed her the cup, and when she looked up and saw his eyes. They say the eyes are the window of the soul, and so much love and purity and beauty poured out on her that she felt like her knees were buckled, that she couldn't even stand. And so her mind and her heart was totally wanting to be with Jacob. That's all she could think about. And then on the third day, she woke up and she thought, I have to have a dress. I have to have a dress. So what did she do? She had to get fine linen. Now, it's very difficult to find fine linen in our little village. But what happened is the traders came from Egypt, and fine linen grew from the flax root in Egypt, and it was called pure whiteness. And so the traders would come to town, and they would bring bolts and bolts of this beautiful material. Now, Tabitha, because it's very expensive, only royals and rich people and the priests, of course, were the ones that could afford this. And so Tabitha could only buy handfuls at a time. And so what happened is she would go to the village every week and just buy a little tiny bit, and it would take months and months for her to get layers and layers of that fine linen for her dress. But what was interesting with Tabitha is that she was growing in layers too. She was growing in layers of learning how to walk freely and accept that kind of love from Jacob. She'd never been loved like that before. She was learning patience, which she didn't have a whole lot of just how to take her time with things. She was learning humility. How do you work with a little versus a lot? But the one thing that brought her so much joy is when she was working, she knew somebody else was working too. It was Jacob. And so in her heart, she thought, yes, I'm working toward our wedding. But guess what? That's what Jacob's doing. That's the only thing on his mind is to get me. The only thing on her mind is to get to him. And so they had two things in common. Now, everything was going to plan. And so Tabitha would make her trips into town. And then one time she went into town, and it was funny because nobody asked her how her wedding plans were going. So she just thought, I wonder if people forgot. Maybe they just forgot I'm getting married. It's been so long. She thought, maybe I should bring my invitations the next time I go into town, just in case. So she would go into town, and then she'd say, did I invite you to my wedding? I can't remember. But just in case, please come. I'm my dress finished, just about. So please come. And would you mind coming to my wedding? I'd love to have you. And could you come and bring your good friend too? Oh, yes. And did I invite you? I'm not sure. Come, please come to my wedding. And I'd love to have you come. And oh, there you are. You're already coming, but you get an invitation anyway. And yes, please, bring your Egypt friends. Yes. And so every time she went into town, she would invite everybody to her wedding. You want to pass these down? So she wanted to make sure nobody forgot she was getting married, because it was very important to her that people knew. Just a minute. Oh, I don't know, did I invite you? I want to make sure you're going to come. So you don't want to miss this. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. And would you mind passing these down? Thank you. And so she felt pretty good. She felt like she pretty much invited. Just, did I get you? Yeah, okay. She wanted to make sure everybody got invited. That was pretty much, she was so happy to do it. She had something happy to talk about because it was going to be a great wedding. Well, guess what? The day came and her dress was finished. And so she invited her dear friends over to come and see it. So her friends came over, she put the dress on, and she was absolutely stunning. And they said, oh, we're going to go home and get our wedding garments too, because we want to show you what we have. So they all ran home, they got their wedding garments, and they thought any minute the groom was going to come, because they got word that something was cooking over at Jacob's father's house. And the interesting thing about this is, in their custom, which is kind of unusual, only the father knew the day of the wedding. Now, most tribes, they kind of figured it'd be about a year and a half, but the Galileans, they liked a surprise. So it was only the father that knew the day of the wedding. So the girls got their dresses, and they're all here, they're all admiring everybody, and then it gets late, and then they go to sleep. And then they wake up in the morning, and, well, it looks like he didn't come. So they decide to, maybe the next day. So the next day they all gather again, they wait and wait and wait, and they fall asleep because he didn't come. And so this happened for at least 3 more days. They would get together and they would wait up all night till they they were sleeping in their wedding garments at this point, and they were keeping the lamps lit because they didn't know when he was going to come. So basically they were running out of oil. So few of them said, hey, we're going to have, if we keep this up, if we keep waiting and waiting, he might not come for another week. So they decided they would go into town and they would get more oil. Now, the other bridesmaids, they were busy. They had a lot going on. There was an election going on in town. They were busy with so many things. And they said, we really don't think he's going to come at night, or he would have come. Who does a wedding in the middle of the night? So we kind of have a feeling that we don't need more oil. And so they decided not to get the oil. So sure enough, what happened is they're all together again, and then they're all sound asleep. And then in the middle of the night, and they're scrambling around, they're lighting the lamps, and then all of a sudden the ones that didn't have the oil, they said, hey, give us your oil because we can't see. And the other girls go, we can't, we're taking her all the way to the father's house for the wedding. Go into town, you've got to get your own oil. So they take off. And then all of a sudden, the lamps are lit, and before you know it, right at the door, at the very door, after all this time, Jacob is standing in front of Tabitha. And she got one look at him, and her knees started to buckle again. She had never experienced this love, never felt this love, but here he is. And what he did is he scooped her up, he picked her up, and he put her on what's called a litter. And basically, it's a rickshaw that she's on this rickshaw, and 4 of Jacob's friends carry her to the father's house. And what they call it is flying to the groom. And so once they get to the father's house, once they get inside, Jacob says to her, he pulls her aside, and he said, I promised you. He said, I will not drink this until we're together in my father's house. And they both took a sip of the cup of joy. Now the wedding lasted for 7 days. And it's interesting because we all know what might happen to us for 7 years in heaven. We are tucked away with God in heaven. But what I want to share with you is from the very before human history began, God was the bridegroom. And his heart for his bride echoed forward through history. He gave us a revealing in Scripture. And he said, I want you to know that I have something so special for you. I have prepared something so special for you. And there's going to come that day when my Father says, go, and I will come and I'll get each one of you, because each one of you are my bride. I drank the cup that was not drinkable so that I could share my cup of joy with each one of you. And so I want to say the reason why he used our Galilean wedding is because he knew that we couldn't understand. We didn't know how to read or write, but he used our very customs to prove to us that he's coming back as the bridegroom for his bride. He's coming back for us, and he's coming back for you. And so I say, shalom, shalom, shalom. Thank you.